My name is Mark. For the past 15 years, I've cleaned up what's left behind. Not just the physical remnants, mind you, but the echoes, the whispers, the stories. I'm a crime scene cleaner. Most people flinch at the mere thought, picturing gore and guts. They're not wrong, not entirely. But what they don't understand is that the real horror isn't always visible. It's what seeps into the walls, into the very air, long after the sirens fade and the bodies are carted away. I started this gig after a particularly messy divorce. Needed something that paid well and didn't require much social interaction. Cleaning up other people's tragedies seemed oddly cathartic at first. A detached, almost clinical process of wiping away the worst moments of someone's life. Mop, bucket, industrial strength bleach, biohazard bags. It became a rhythm, a morbid dance I performed in silent, blood-soaked rooms. I've seen it all, or so I thought. Domestic disputes where love turned to loathing and a knife. Drug deals gone south, leaving shattered glass and shattered lives. Suicides, the quiet, desperate acts that leave an indelible stain not just on the floor, but on your soul. You develop a thick skin, a filter, you have to. Otherwise, the sheer weight of human misery would crush you. My first few years were a blur of nameless victims and faceless perpetrators. I focused on the task, the science of it. Blood spatter analysis, decomposition stages, the precise chemical cocktails to neutralize odors that would gag a ghoul. I was good at it, efficient, emotionally impermeable. Then came the Miller case. It wasn't particularly gruesome by my standards. A quiet, elderly woman, found in her armchair, a single bullet wound to the temple. Apparent suicide. The police had already cleared it, tidied up the minimal mess, bagged the weapon. My job was just to make it pristine again for the family. But when I stepped into that small, overly perfumed living room, something felt off. The air was heavy, not with the usual metallic tang of old blood, but with a palpable despair, like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. There was a small, almost imperceptible stain on the floral rug, a dark, rich crimson that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. As I knelt, gloved hands ready with my enzymatic cleaner, I noticed something else. A pattern. It wasn't a random splash. It looked almost like a symbol. A crude, swirling spiral, barely visible within the larger stain. I dismissed it as an artifact of the bullet's impact, a trick of the light, or my own overactive imagination. But as I scrubbed, the spiral seemed to deepen, to glow with an inner luminescence that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I scrubbed harder, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead, until it finally faded, or perhaps was merely absorbed by the fibers of the rug. I left that house feeling unnerved, a sensation I hadn't experienced in years. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of my old apartment building sounded like a floorboard groaning in the Miller house. Every shadow in my room seemed to stretch and writhe. I chalked it up to stress, a one-off. But it wasn't. The spiral reappeared, not always prominent, sometimes just a fleeting impression in the arterial spray on a wall, or a faint, almost invisible tracing in the pooled blood beneath a bed. But it was there, in a surprisingly high number of my subsequent jobs. A young couple, murdered in their bed, the spiral etched faintly into the sheets. A homeless man, found bludgeoned in an alley, the symbol smeared on the grimy brick wall, almost like a signature. I started keeping a mental log, then a discreet coded one in a small notebook I carried. Date, address, a crude sketch of the spiral's appearance. I didn't dare speak of it. Who would believe me? "Hey boss, I think the blood is drawing ominous symbols." I'd be off to the funny farm faster than you could say sanity check. The unsettling incidents escalated beyond the mere visual anomalies. The first time I heard it, I almost dropped my kit. I was in a derelict apartment, cleaning up a particularly nasty scene involving a disgruntled tenant and a shotgun. The silence of the abandoned building was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic swish of my mop. Then, clear as a bell, a whisper. "Help me." It was faint, barely audible, like a breath against my ear. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs, but the room was empty. Just me, the lingering smell of ozone and decay, and the smeared remains of a life cut short. I told myself it was the pipes, the wind, a trick of the acoustics, but the voice, it had been too distinct, too desperate. After that, the whispers became a regular occurrence. Sometimes a choked sob, sometimes a raspy gasp, sometimes just a guttural moan that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. They always came when I was deep into a job, my guard down, my focus entirely on the grim task at hand. And they always seemed to emanate from the vicinity of the most concentrated bloodstains. I started to feel like an archaeologist, digging through layers of human suffering, not for artifacts, but for echoes. The blood wasn't just physical matter anymore. It was a record, a silent film strip of agony and terror played back to me in fragments. I remember a specific case, a family of 4, wiped out in a home invasion. The father, mother, and 2 young children. The scene was an abattoir. As I worked on the eldest daughter's bedroom, a wave of unbearable cold washed over me. Despite the summer heat outside, the air grew thick, pressing in on me, making it hard to breathe. And then I saw her. Not with my eyes, not really. It was more like a projection, a translucent overlay on reality. A small, trembling girl, huddled in the corner, whimpering, her eyes wide with unspeakable fear. She was gone in an instant, a flicker, a trick of the light. But the terror she radiated, it was real. It clung to me like the sticky residue of dried blood. I began to understand. The blood wasn't just telling stories, it was replaying them. And something, some entity, was amplifying those replays, forcing me to witness them. The spiral, I theorized, was its signature, a mark left by something that fed on the residue of violent death. My sleep became a battleground. Nightmares, vivid and terrifying, plagued me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, the screams of phantom victims still ringing in my ears. I saw the faces of the dead, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths agape in silent pleas. I started drinking, not heavily, not at first, just enough to dull the edges, to make the nights less agonizing. But the alcohol only numbed me for a short while before the dread clawed its way back, sharper than before. My colleagues noticed. "You're looking a little rough, Mark," Dave, my supervisor, said one morning. "Everything okay?" I just grunted. "Long nights," he nodded, accepting the answer. They were used to cleaners being a bit eccentric. The job does that to you. But none of them seemed to truly understand the depth of the rot I was witnessing. Or maybe they just didn't want to. The whispers grew bolder. They started forming sentences, disjointed, fragmented, but undeniable. "He watched, always my hungry. You can seek an us." I started talking back, under my breath at first. "Who? What do you want?" The silence that followed was always heavier, more oppressive than before. Then came the Carmichael case. This one was different. A series of gruesome dismemberments across the city, baffling the police. No apparent motive, no forced entry, no clear weapon. The only commonality was the sheer savagery of the attacks. When my team was called to the latest scene, a small, unassuming apartment in a quiet neighborhood, I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach the moment I stepped out of the van. The stench hit me first. Not just the metallic tang of blood, but something else. Something acrid and sweet, like burnt sugar mixed with decay. It was sickening. The crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze, a yellow demarcation of unspeakable horror. Inside, it was worse than anything I had ever encountered. The victim, a young woman, had been butchered, deliberately, methodically. It was an act of pure, unadulterated malice. The floor was a slick, dark canvas of blood, flesh, and bone fragments. And everywhere I looked, were the spirals. They weren't faint impressions this time. They were bold, stark, almost glowing with an internal malevolence. Etched into the spatter on the walls, carved into the furniture, even formed by the alignment of severed fingers. It was like a grotesque art installation. My breath hitched. This wasn't just residue. It was a declaration, a message. As I began the grim task, my hands trembling despite years of training, the whispers intensified. They weren't just disembodied voices anymore. They were coming from the blood itself. A cacophony of overlapping screams, pleas, and a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards. I looked down at the largest pool of blood, the one beneath what remained of the victim's torso. The spiral there was almost three-dimensional, like a vortex drawing me in, and within its swirling depths, I saw flashes. Rapid, sickeningly clear visions, a shadow. Tall, gaunt, impossibly thin, moving with a fluid, unnatural grace. It had no discernible features, just an absence of light, a deeper black against the already dim room. It wasn't holding a weapon. It was interacting with the victim. Its movements were too fast to comprehend. Yet I saw the agony on the woman's face, frozen in a silent scream. And then, the most terrifying thing of all, as the shadow moved, it seemed to absorb something from the air, from the very essence of the dying woman. A mist, dark and ethereal, rising from her body and flowing into the shadow. It was feeding. A wave of nausea washed over me, so potent I nearly vomited. This wasn't just a killer. It was something else. Something that consumed the fear, the pain, the very life force of its victims. And the blood, the residual trauma, was its conduit, its language. The whispers swelled, now distinct, cutting through the general din of terror. "You see us, don't you, Mark?" The voice was cold, ancient, and bone-chillingly familiar. It was the same voice I'd been hearing in snippets, now complete, directed at me. "You clean, but you also collect." My blood ran cold. Collect. Had my prolonged exposure, my intimate interaction with these scenes, made me a vessel, a magnet? I stumbled backward, tripping over a discarded piece of furniture, my heart hammering against my ribs. My eyes darted around the room, desperate for an escape, but the spiraling blood seemed to pulse, to expand, trapping me within its horrifying canvas. The shadow, the one I had seen in the vision, solidified slightly at the edge of my vision. It was still vague, like a distortion in the air, but its presence was undeniable. It was watching me, waiting. The stories, they linger, for those who listen. The voice was closer now, almost in my ear, even though the shadow remained at a distance. And you, Mark, you are an excellent listener. A terrifying realization slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. The spirals, the whispers, the visions. They weren't just residual, they were intentional. This entity wasn't just a passive consumer of fear, it was actively reaching out, drawing me in. It had been using the blood, the medium I worked with every day, to communicate, to groom me. My cleaning, my methodical, detached cleaning. It wasn't erasing the horror, it was concentrating it. By removing the physical evidence, I was, in some twisted way, purifying the channel, making it easier for the entity to manifest, to speak, to feed. I dropped my equipment, the clang echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to run, to scream, to tear my own eyes out, to unsee the horrors burned into my mind. But I was frozen, mesmerized by the sheer, malevolent power radiating from the room. The shadow moved, not walking, but gliding, like smoke. It drifted towards the largest bloodstain, the one with the most prominent spiral. And as it did, the whispers coalesced, forming a chilling chorus of tormented voices, all speaking in unison, all directed at me. You are ours now. A cold, unseen force slammed into me, throwing me against the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment, the world spun. When my vision cleared, the shadow was closer, looming over the spiral. And from the blood, from the very depths of that crimson vortex, tendrils of pure darkness began to unfurl. Not just shadows, but something tangible, like black smoke given form. They writhed and twisted, reaching, beckoning. Panic, raw and unadulterated, finally broke through my paralysis. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was my soul on the line. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in my back. My instincts screamed at me to get out, to flee. But something held me. A morbid curiosity, a horrifying sense of responsibility, or perhaps the entity already had its hooks in me, deeper than I knew. I lunged for my duffel bag, fumbling for my industrial-strength UV light. It was a long shot, a desperate measure. I'd used it to detect latent bloodstains before, but I had no idea if it would affect this. I clicked it on. A harsh, bluish-white beam cut through the dimness. As the light struck the large bloodstain, a strange thing happened. The spiral didn't disappear, but it seemed to shimmer, to writhe as if in pain. The tendrils of darkness recoiled slightly, hissing like steam. The collective whispers turned into a furious, distorted shriek. "Fool, you cannot erase us." I knew it wouldn't erase them, but maybe, just maybe, it could repel them, expose them, disrupt their hold. I swept the beam across the room, illuminating every bloodstain, every spiraling mark. Each one pulsed, seemed to vibrate with a suppressed malevolence. As the light danced across the scene, a new horror unfolded. The victims, I saw them, not as translucent overlays, but with chilling clarity. The young woman, her eyes wide with terror, her body twisted into an impossible angle. The other victims of the previous cases too. The Miller woman, the young couple, the homeless man. They were all there, transparent but distinct, their forms overlaying the very places they had died. Their faces were contorted in silent agony, their spectral mouths agape in soundless screams. They were trapped here, tethered to their violent ends, their stories endlessly replayed for the entity's consumption. And I, Mark, the cleaner, was trapped with them, witnessing their eternal torment. The shadow, now a little more defined in the UV light, seemed to writhe, its form flickering. It was attempting to retreat, but the light held it, like a net. "You interfere. This is our domain." The voice was weaker, crackling with static, but still filled with venom. I knew, with chilling certainty, that if I stayed, I would become another one of them, another story for the entity to feast upon, trapped in an endless loop of my own terrifying memories. My gaze fell on the main door. It felt miles away, but it was my only chance. With a primal scream that tore from my throat, I bolted. I didn't stop to grab anything else, didn't look back. The whispers clawed at my heels, a chorus of angry, tormented voices. The air grew frigid, and I felt unseen hands trying to pull me back, to trip me. But I pushed through, driven by a terror so profound it transcended physical pain. I burst out of the apartment, gasping for breath, the sunlight on my face feeling like a blessing from a forgotten god. I stumbled down the stairs, ignoring the concerned stares of a neighbor just arriving home. I didn't care what they thought. I just needed to get away. I drove, for hours, aimlessly, until the city lights blurred into a distant haze, until the sun dipped below the horizon and the world was swallowed by darkness once more. But the darkness offered no solace. Every shadow held a lurking fear. Every creak of the car, every rustle of leaves sounded like a whisper. I haven't been back to work. I can't. The thought of stepping into another crime scene, of facing those bloodstains, of hearing those stories, it's enough to send me spiraling into a full-blown panic attack. My apartment, once my sanctuary, now feels like a prison. Every dark corner holds a potential threat. I see the spirals everywhere, in the swirling patterns of my coffee, in the condensation on my windows, even in the grain of the wooden floorboards. They are a constant, terrifying reminder. The whispers, they never truly stopped. They're fainter now, mere echoes at the edge of my hearing, but they're always there. A constant murmur of agony, a low hum of malevolence. They remind me that I didn't escape entirely. I'm marked. The entity, whatever it is, got a piece of me. It showed me what it was, what it did, and it opened my mind to the terrifying reality that exists just beneath the surface of our mundane world. It allowed me to see the true nature of the bloodstains, not as mere organic matter, but as horrifying conduits, as living memories of pain and death. I'm no longer just Mark, the crime scene cleaner. I'm Mark, the unwilling witness, the one who cleans the evidence but carries the stories within him. And every night, as I lie awake staring into the oppressive darkness, I wonder, when will my blood tell its own story? And what horrifying spiral will it form? The world is a canvas, and death, it seems, is the ultimate artist. And I just clean up the mess. Or at least I used to. Now, I just wait for the inevitable. The next story, my story,